Right, good morning. Welcome to day 2 of Changing Practices for Changing Times. It's Tuesday, August 11th, 2020. I really appreciate everybody being here. A few quick logistical announcements as we get ready to settle in. Today's agenda, as has been the case since yesterday and will continue to be the case throughout the week, is on the same document. So if you scroll down to Tuesday, the 11th, you'll see all the things that we need to do, and Roy is going to get us started really quickly. Just as a recap, if you were not able to attend the technology workshop yesterday, the recording of the workshop minus the breakout and work time is right there, and also the recording for yesterday, if you need to go back to it again, is right there, and I'll put those in the same place on each day of the agenda. And that was all the logistical stuff that oh no, Becky wanted me to remind you, if you are signing up for Sketches, she would really appreciate having your name on the list today. So that's right above our Tuesday economic money jar agenda photo there. So if you want Sketches, please be sure to put your name on there by the end of the day today. Becky, Roy, Dave, other announcements before Roy does our opening activity here? Oh, and happy birthday to Terry, officially, on the recording.
I believe we can call upon Dave Johnson to do an interpretive dance.
Wow, already, so
He
quickly.
loves birthdays.
Okay.
Yeah, hard pass.
Oh, see, he put up the bookshelves in the background, not the dance studio or stage, Becky. That was your cue. We should have known he wasn't going to do it. It's okay. It's all right. All right. Roy, anything else we need to be aware of before we get ready to do your activity? All right. I don't know if he disappeared. I have too many Zoom windows here. I don't see him on camera, so I hope he's coming back here relatively soon to lead us through the activity. Any other questions about the plan? Today's going to be a little bit different, as will the rest of the week, in the sense that we're going to have a teaching demonstration. So pretty much when we get done with the activity here to do an icebreaker and intro, from about 9:15 to 10:15, Dave is going to jump in and he is going to be helping us think about how these practices come to life. And what I like to say about these teaching demonstrations is that we're imagining that we are in a classroom setting. That doesn't mean that we're necessarily trying to treat everyone like 6th graders or 8th graders or 12th graders, but we are trying to show you the instructional practices that we would do. And then what will happen from that 10:15 to 10:30 time, when you go back into breakouts again, is that you'll have an opportunity to talk about it and make connections to the C3 and the disciplinary literacy essentials and all the other types of activities and conversations we've been having this week. So the goal of the teaching demonstration each day this week is for one of us to kind of take the lead, share something with you as if you were learners in our classroom, and then give you the opportunity to step back from it and do kind of a reflective debrief and analysis. And Dave will be our first person to do that. There's Roy, you're back now. All right, we were just talking about logistics and anything. Any other quick announcements before we move into your activity, sir?
No, and I apologize. I got kicked off. I have a help desk ticket in, and they're looking at it behind the scenes. So hopefully it'll be fixed by tomorrow.
I think this is probably the 3rd help desk ticket I've heard you submit this summer so far.
Yeah.
I'm very sorry. Very sorry you're having to deal with that. So, all right. Well, I'm going to get the breakout rooms ready. So I'll let you give the instructions and then we'll be ready to go.
All right. We'll dive in this morning with an activity, recall and respond. And what I first want to do is tell you the why behind the activity, which is really quick, which is important because we need to be doing this, of course, with our students. And it always puts it into context. So for this morning, it's really about engaging your mind, get us into learning right away, get us thinking, working with others, activating prior knowledge. We're going to do a quick activity that gets you to think about your learning yesterday and bring that forward to today. And activating prior knowledge is an important component of the formative assessment process. Activating prior knowledge is not new. It's been around for a very, very long time. But what we know about it now with the research in the late 80s through the 90s, early 2000s, is its impact on learning. And so we now have a number of studies that show that when you engage in activating prior knowledge activities, it does impact learning. And so a lot of people knew that anyway because they saw the evidence in their students. But now we know we have some research to support it. So we want to activate that prior knowledge, get you thinking about yesterday and bringing that forward to today. And then finally, just to prepare you to make some connections for learning today so that you see where we were yesterday and what we were grappling with in the content and bringing that forward. And as you go through today, you start to see those connections. So here's how we're going to proceed. The how and what of this, we're using a 5-3-1. So what I'll do is give you the directions first, and then you'll be placed in a Jamboard based on the random groups that Troy will pick. He'll send you into those rooms. When you see the notice of the breakout room come in, it'll give you a number of your room, and that's the Jamboard page you go to. Each Jamboard page has a title, a group number on it. And these directions are also placed on that Jamboard. So I'll give them to you verbally, you'll see them in writing, but then when you get into your groups, you'll see those again. To start off, what I want you to do first is on a separate piece of paper right now, or a sticky note on your computer, wherever you'd like to do this, take up to 90 seconds and list 5 words or phrases that bring back the experience of the session yesterday. 5 words or phrases for your learning yesterday. If you take 90 seconds to do those, jot those down because you're going to be putting them into the Jamboard in just a minute. So we'll take 90 seconds, list your 5 words or phrases that bring back the experience of yesterday's session. Okay, there's our 90 seconds. That's the 5 of the 5-3-1. And the 3 then, when you get into your groups, will be after you post. And by the way, we'll have a couple of groups of 5, just to be aware of that, and that's okay. You're going to open up a Post-it note on your Jamboard that's the number of the board according to the group you're put in. And you'll put your 5 down, place them on the board, and then you'll have up to 5 minutes to do the next 2 steps. And what you'll do is you're going to select the top 3 out of all of the ones that you have. So if you have 4 people, you're obviously going to have 20. If you have 5, you have 25. Have conversation about those and use your own criteria to kind of select the top 3. Once you have those top 3 isolated, then continue that conversation and say, okay, what's the one we're going to approach consensus, because you may not reach full consensus, that captures the essence of the session yesterday for all of you. So have that conversation about it and talking about the information and the word or phrase. I should say word or phrase. A phrase is okay. And select that one, and then be ready to report out. And we're going to randomly select people to report out, and we'll see how that goes with a random selection tool that you may or may not have used before, but I'll bring that to your attention. So at this point, just be aware when you report out, it'll be the word or phrase. I should have word or phrase are there, and then a brief reasoning. Here's some things we talked about, and then we'll hear from each group, and that'll kind of engage us and activate our prior knowledge and get us ready to go on to the first workshop for today. What questions might you have about the task you have before you?
There is one question in the chat, Roy. Maybe you address this. What should we do with repeated words?
Any repeated words, they're just in the list, and that is fine. If you have any repeated words, that may be something you consider as a group to say, we're thinking down the same lines here. So that is fine to have repeated words in your groups of 5. And they may or may not become part of the 3 or the final 1. That's really up to the group to have that conversation. So it's okay to have repeated words.
Okay. And have you given us a link to the Jamboard on the agenda, or will you drop it in the chat room for us here? Do you want
I am dropping it in the chat room.
Perfect. I'll grab that link and put it on the agenda too, so we have that. Any other questions for us before we push you out into the breakout rooms?
I'm just looking to stop sharing. Open up the chat here.
No problem. I could even try to take over so it gets you out of your sharing. There you go.
Yeah, there
Sometimes
you go.
I know those buttons get lost when you're in full screen mode or whatnot. So, all right. So yeah, we'll drop, once you drop that in there, I will also put the link to the Jamboard for this activity right here. And all right, you've got it in the chat. We're going to put it right here on the agenda if people need it from there. You'll have 5 minutes in your breakout rooms, 2 rooms of 5, 2 rooms of 4. Enjoy your conversation. All right, well, welcome back. Roy is gonna have us quickly share our findings on the Jamboard, or kind of talk through them, I think, rather than do a full group report out here. Roy, do you want me to screen share the Jamboard, or do you want to do that?
I'll do that. I can do that.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, and
Our group didn't
this
finish. Sorry, our group didn't finish.
Well,
hey, that's okay.
That's okay.
That's
And
fine.
yeah, that polite reminder from yesterday too. I know when you're in the breakout rooms, you're all unmuted, and then when we come back to the main room, just that kind reminder to mute yourself if you are not speaking at that time. So thanks. All right, sorry, Roy. Technical challenges all around. Here we go. Back to you, sir.
Yeah, no worries. As you know, as we talked about yesterday, that when you have to wait a minute, it seems like an eternity. But when you have 5 minutes that you're working on something, it goes by lightning fast, So that's what kind of happened here, and what gave us a little bit of delay is I thought I had that editing for everybody, and so that caused a little bit of a delay. So those things happen online, as you know, just like in the classroom. So we're all used to it and you roll with it. But let's not lose the essence of the activity, and that is a couple of things. Activate your prior knowledge, recall from yesterday, and I see that on the Jamboard here, we've got a couple of things, a lot about inquiry, several words on inquiry, go slow to go fast. The shifts article was recalled, the idea of the DLEs, disciplinary literacy, the shifting practices that we talked about. Those are all good things, making a lot of connections. Scaffolding came up a number of times. I've said that several times. So that's what this group, and I think there may have been more than one group on a Jamboard, and that's fine. That's all right. This is not necessarily a formal activity where we have to spread out the data that we get in, because it's for you to activate your prior knowledge and for us as presenters to see what you've brought to the table. Here's another group here, specific and relative examples, refreshing. Why do we teach this is what happened. Idea of compelling questions, which is a good carryover there. We started that with as part of the C3 framework yesterday. Dave's going to dive into that today. Mention of DBQ, skills of a historian, again, disciplinary literacy, essentials, focus on higher order thinking,
Oh,
idea of
okay.
good citizens. And lastly, I think there's one more board here. Positive questions, collaborative tips, new ideas, a lot of collaboration, informative, literacy, student-driven. Yeah, collaborative. Top 3, collaborative, new ideas, and informative. And then they settled on collaborative, working collectively, expediting our learning. And here's this group. They posted their final inquiry via Jamboard and breakout sessions, pulling that in. And so there's a lot of inquiry going on with us as we look at all of this about the C3 framework, the DLEs, the idea of a blueprint, putting them together. And we're going to continue that journey. And today you're going to see, and we're going to transition into this right now, into workshop 1, this whole idea of compelling and supporting questions. To close out this, are there any, what questions might you have or comments that you might have?
I would just pick up on one thing from the chat. I was trying to get it written out, but you know, just this notion that if we were in a room with kids and we had chart paper and markers and post-its and boom, you know, they're ready to go, and you quickly identify who's not doing or needs help or needs a nudge or whatever. But just the goofy way that things have been with technology, and Google changed kind of the default settings. The default used to be that all the Google Docs were open, and now they're all kind of private. And, you know, sometimes we just forget. And so someone made the note in the Google Doc agenda. We got it fixed as quickly as we could, but still not everybody was able to participate. So I think as we look at activities like this, which can be, this is a great example of something that I think could be a 5-minute activity, a 50-minute activity, or 5-day activity, right? Like you could take this as just this one little nugget for thinking and brainstorming, or it could become the basis of something bigger for a whole class session, or it could stretch and turn into something that helps push questioning and strategies over a longer, more sustained period of time. So sorry, Jessica, that you didn't get a chance to get all your notes on the board there, but our hope is that you're seeing a bunch of different strategies this week that you can implement and use with flexibility in different ways. So, all right, well, with that, we are about to transition into our first teaching demonstration of the week. Dave, who is the expert on compelling and supporting questions, is going to lead us through his teaching demonstration, which is titled Launching, Introducing, and Unpacking Both Compelling and Supporting Questions with Your Students. So Dave, take it away.
All right, thanks, Troy. I'm going to start sharing my screen here. I'm in dual monitor mode today, using my iPad to use as a second screen. So if questions come up during this, I will be taking a look at the chat, but if I am really going on something, Troy and Roy and Becky, if you see something in there, please, please break in and let me know at the appropriate spot. So my teaching demonstration today is going to tie into the workshop that I'll be doing a little bit later today, which is in 2 parts. So this is, I guess, sort of part 1 of a 3-part stomp through some of the things you can do with questions in a inquiry. And, you know, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to treat this sort of as a teaching demonstration and sort of as a metacognitive piece here. I want to both have you experience what the student would experience in a lot of these cases, and then I also want to discuss the reasoning why I set it up this way. Quick disclaimer, This is not like the one right way to do any of this. This is just a way. But I want to make sure that you guys are able to sort of experience it from the student lens, but talk about it from the teacher lens, if that makes sense. So to kick this off, every inquiry, and you guys were actually given a inquiry in the email that Troy sent earlier on introducing this course. It's this one, was it Destiny to Move West? And we're actually going to be working from this. You can have it open, you can have it in front of you if you have it printed off. At the relevant times, I'm actually also going to have it up on the screen. So any of those work for you. Sometimes my internet, I live in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes my internet makes things a little fuzzy. So, you know, just any of the ways you need to have it open, go ahead. And I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So every inquiry starts with a staging activity. And this is no different. So the compelling question that we are centered around in, you know, this week is, was it destiny to move west? And to get kids to think about this in advance, there's all sorts of different ways you can stage the inquiry. I'm doing the one that is directly listed in the inquiry itself. I want students to reflect on an action that they have taken from which they benefited at the expense of another individual or group. So what I want you to do is, in just a second, I'm going to drop a link to a Padlet in the chat. And if you're not familiar with Padlet, I will go over what it is after we've used it, or I will go over what it is right off the bat. But I'm going to drop a link to a Padlet in the chat. And the question is simply to describe an action that you took at some point in time that caused some sort of moral conflict for you. So again, when is a time that you have taken an action that maybe benefited you at the expense of another individual or group? You know, this can be as simple as I got extra playtime on a sports team, or I chose to go to the mall with one friend while ignoring another. And don't worry, this will not be shared. You are protected by presenter attendee confidentiality. In fact, in the Padlet, everything is going to be, you're not going to have any identifying characteristics. So the link to this Padlet, I'm going to drop in the chat, and I will briefly show you. Am I still sharing? I think I hit the stop share button, didn't I?
You have stopped.
There we go. All right. There we go. I don't want anyone to see the magic behind the scenes, you know, so let me drop this in the chat right now. Oh, I know why I did that, because I can never find the chat when I'm sharing. There we go. And I still can't find the chat, even though I'm not sharing. There we go. You know, you would think after 5 months of this that Zoom would be less awkward, but here we are, watching me struggle on my screen. All right, so I have put the link to the Padlet in, and I'm going to start sharing again, and I'm going to jump over to the Padlet proper. So briefly describe an action you took that resulted in moral conflict. To unpack that a little bit further, it's basically a time you benefited at the expense of someone else. You can double click inside the Padlet to get a new note going, or you can click on the plus button and that will create one. But just take a second to write down a time that you took an action that resulted in some form of moral conflict. I'm seeing some great stuff come in. Fast tracked through the airport line. Threw assignments in the recycling instead of grading them. Whoever wrote that, I'll make you feel better. I think we've all been there at some point in our careers. I don't think there's a single person, anyone who's scowling like I would never do that right now. Yeah, we've all, yeah. Oh, I love the car one. My sister moved out, the parents kept her car as they paid for it. I then bought the car when I turned 16. Wrote a paper where we were supposed to interview someone without actually interviewing them. You know, this is like group therapy today. I kind of like it. You know, we're letting it all out. This would be one of those times where we'd put it all in little sheets of paper, we'd read a few and then throw them in the fire, right? All that staff development. All right, so as these are coming in, it was brought to my attention I'm sharing the wrong screen. So I'm gonna share one more time, and you guys are in the Padlet anyway, so it doesn't matter at this exact second. I'm gonna move the group chat back over here and choose desktop 2. And so this is what we've ended up with. And you guys can probably see it as well because you guys are actually in the Padlet itself. But all of these are talking about moral conflicts. And when we're talking about moral conflicts with adolescents, you know, the inquiry that we're looking at would really fit in Michigan's 8th grade curriculum when we're talking about manifest destiny.
We're looking at we're looking at your email, sir, which is fine, but you might
I chose the second one. Goodness.
Well, when you move into presenter mode, I think there's a swap. That's happened to me before too. We're all figuring out our Zoom settings.
I chose desktop 2. This is just, can you see it now?
No, we see the Padlet now. We see the Padlet. It's all good.
Wow. It's a little, I'm not used to this 9 o'clock in the morning thing anymore, right? So, okay, no. So we're not really talking about a huge moral conflict with teenagers. What they're going to come up with is going to be not quite as good as some of the stuff that you came up with. I mean, I could write a soap opera with a couple of these things, but you know, the idea is to really get them into this thinking of, you know, not just what a moral conflict is, but have I experienced one, so that they can then apply it to something a little bit larger. Any of my 8th grade teachers out there who have taught a westward expansion unit before know that you know, there was 1 or 2 moral conflicts involved with our push out west. So this is just really designed to get kids thinking in advance about what a moral conflict is, and hopefully giving them an opportunity to think about, you know, some others throughout the course of this, but also not just others, but what the moral conflict was with the westward expansion piece. So every inquiry that you're going to find at a place like C3 Teachers or the Michigan Inquiry Hub, all of these include some sort of anticipatory set that's generally called, you know, staging the compelling question. And with this one, you know, I had you guys do a Padlet, but there's a ton of other things that you can do with it. And for those of you who have never used Padlet before, I'm going to show you very, very quickly how easy it is to create one. I'm going to make sure that I'm looking at the right screen here. And this is what happens when you create a free account. There's also an upgraded account. But when you create a free account at Padlet, you can do what I just did. I have never used any of the paid features, but it's just as simple as clicking on Make a Padlet. I have reached my Padlet limit, so I'm actually going to go back in and delete one from a long time ago. So you're allowed 5 with the free one, which is probably enough for what most of you would do. And I would never do something like advocate for, you know, creating multiple email addresses if you need to do that, because I've certainly never done that to get around limits before. Well, I have this
Is that a
untitled one,
moral
and
dilemma, Dave? Does that count as a
that
moral
might
dilemma?
actually be a
Okay.
moral conflict of my
All
own.
all
You
right,
know, it's a
just wanted to
small
make
moral
sure.
conflict, but you know. And so it brings you into a little setup wizard that will allow you to create a Padlet, and you know, it's pretty much as simple as typing in what you want them to talk about, and then you give them the link directly from your address bar. You can push it into your learning management system if you need to. You can push it out through you know, a chat if you're using Google Hangouts or Zoom. But then it gives them that link, and they can go in and double click, and poof, they're off. So now a word of caution is anonymity. You know, there's nothing that requires them to turn their names in. A way you can get around that is say, you know, I would like for you to put your name on this. However, then you run into another potential conflict when you're asking them to describe a moral conflict. So it's up to you to consider when you want that anonymity and when you might want a name actually attached to it. But Padlet's a good little tool, and I wanted to share that with you. But staging the inquiry is important before you deliver the compelling question to students, because it starts to get their brain thinking in the realm which they're going to be traveling through the course of however many days your inquiry ends up taking. So I also wanted to make a connection to the literacy essentials. Everything I'm going to do in here starts to touch upon some of the things in Essential 5, and I didn't put Essential 5 on the slide. I just put the first couple of things on there, but you know, a question itself is an opportunity for students to share something simple, but it's also a tool for developing and building trust within a classroom, which is going to make it easier to have some of those strong discussions of text as you weave it into your daily classroom. So this staging activity was simple, and it was you know, delivered through Padlet, and it was right there in the inquiry. I will show you right now where those live in a standard C3 style inquiry. You've got this staging the question piece here, right underneath the compelling question and what standards it's hitting, and then you get a smaller description of what to do with that in this staging the compelling question box that appears later in the inquiry. But once you've done that, it's time to actually move into the question itself, which in this case is, was it destiny to move west? And you know, what we're going to do here is over the course of this whole week, we're going to be picking apart this inquiry with different presenters in different ways. And I like to have a brief conversation on using the compelling question right out of the gate. I work with a lot of teachers up north, and they, you know, when that pre-post test craze hit Michigan, I had some that were like, well, I solved that problem of figuring out what pretest to give kids on the first day of a unit. I solved that problem really easily. I just took the test that I give them at the end of the unit, and I gave it to them at the beginning of the unit. And then when my administrator asked me to demonstrate growth, I just showed them. I was like, look, on the first day they took this test and they bombed it. And you know, at the end of this unit, look, they took this test and they did a lot better. That's growth. And while they're not wrong, what I hate about that practice is you already know going in when you're giving kids that test that they're going to bomb it. So it's not telling you anything. And that's the point of a pre and post test, right? Is to judge where kids are and what they already know. So it's not really telling you anything. And what's, I think, even worse than the fact that it's not telling you anything is that it's wasting your kids' time, right? Because for however long it takes them to go through that test, even if they sit there and bubble a pirate ship, you know, if it's a bubble sheet, you know, they know that they don't know any of these answers. So what's the point? So I love to advocate with my teachers up north about using the compelling question as part of the pre and post test. Now we'll get into ways you use the compelling question as the assessment at the end, because it's not always just write an essay. You know, I've got a piece on Thursday that'll talk a little bit more about the huge variety of things you can do with it. But on the very first day, ask kids the compelling question and just get their overall beginning notes. And you could do this in a variety of ways. I'm going to showcase another one that's not a Padlet. This one goes back to good old Google Docs. So I'm actually going to drop a link. I'm going to drop a link in the chat. That Zoom icon bar is never where you want it to be, right? So I'm going to drop a link in the chat if I can find the chat again. Well, heck, I might as well do what I've been doing and just stop the share long enough to do that. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat, and that link is going to take you out to the Google Doc that I think you saw on your screen just a minute ago. And I'm going to share desktop 2, and you will find your name in the column. The compelling question for this unit is, was it destiny to move west? And I want you to find your column and just write your brief thoughts on your answer to that question. I'll give you about 3 minutes. Don't just say yes or no. I would like to say yes because, or no because, or maybe because. And just give me your initial brief thoughts. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. It's 9:43 on my clock. That means at 9:46, I'll wait a little bit into 9:46. I will stop us and we'll kind of discuss the answers. My clock says 9:46 because I ate a little bit into the 9:43. I'm going to give you about 30 more seconds and then we'll discuss. All right, so what I did here, obviously I gave you guys a Google Doc and it had your name in it, and I asked you all to fill in the chart. This is great if you, again, want to demonstrate some form of growth between the start of your inquiry and the end of your inquiry. But keep in mind, I am in a room full of history teachers right now. which means I am getting much better answers from you guys than I'm going to get from my initial students. They may not even recognize right offhand how big a deal this moving west thing is, or they may think of it from a presentist standpoint of, well, we, stretch sea to shining sea here now. So, why not, it was obviously our destiny, because look, that's where we are right now. So, what I'd like to do is I would like for you guys I'm going to call on a couple of people based off of the answers that they provided. And, it should come as no surprise to him. First person I'm going to call on to talk about his answer is going to be Mark Raffler. Mark, do you want to unmute really quick and tell us your answer and tell us what you were thinking, how you arrived at it?
I was thinking that when you said of no surprise to him that you were going to come my way. So I just spoke to the idea that it seemed like through natural curiosity, but also then probably through necessity, that there was going to be some form of expansion. And then I went a little bit further into those pieces, more explaining the necessity fact that early on families were more establishing and finding a way, but then as they became established, families would grow, other people would continue to come, and sort of be a natural need for that more space. And the only place that seemed logical to find that space would be to the west.
Thank you, Mark. I've spent many years building a collaborative relationship with Mark, which is why I felt like I could count on him to, deliver our first answer, and he ripped the Band-Aid off. Would anyone else like to unmute briefly and explain to us their answer and what they were thinking and how they arrived at it?
I can go, Dave, if you like.
Go for it.
Mine is maybe, because I don't know what you mean by destiny. And that's not trying to be clever for the group conversation. I think that it clearly was destiny to those who believed that God had preordained, Europeans to take over the entire continent. But I also know that there was a huge group of people in the 1840s who were greatly opposed to it because they believed that expanding westward would cause lots of challenges. So my answer is maybe, because I don't really understand that word. I think that word is so loaded, and I think that you as my teacher will need to help me understand what you mean by destiny. So that's my answer.
100%. Love that answer. And Christy sort of hinted at, a conversation that could be had over that word destiny when she wrote, no, destiny implies a religious rationalization of assumed superiority. So that may also provide a really good launch pad into discussion about what destiny is and how it fits in this particular situation in particular. And I also go back to, think of Jefferson and Madison, who, you would be studying them at the beginning of your 8th grade course as it is. And this whole idea of, they thought that, it was a great deal for us to, double the size of our country with the Louisiana Purchase, but they also recognized, as founders that they set up the government, Madison in particular, so that was not necessarily something that was constitutionally protected. So, they had that duty to grapple with too. That's somewhat of a moral conflict for those two gentlemen as we discuss this whole overall piece of Manifest Destiny. So, and yes, you're absolutely right. Did they really want the land, or just to keep it from the British and the French? I think it was probably a little bit from both columns, but yeah, so. All right, so this is another way you can stage the compelling question, and giving this to kids in a Google Doc allows you to have easy access to it. Other ways you could do it, if you're using Google Classroom or any other learning management system, is post it as a discussion question and just have kids answer it, that first day coming in before you give them any of that context, just to see where they are. Because that's a really good teaching point, Matt, that you brought up. I'm making the assumption coming into this that they know what the word destiny means and how it could be applied in this situation. And that may or may not be the case. So that tells me as the teacher, regardless of what comes next in this inquiry, regardless of the sources that they're going to study and the supporting questions that they're going to take a look at, they're going to really need to know what destiny is. So I may need to work that into my plans for the day. So the compelling question, like I said before, can be a really good assessment at the end of the inquiry. And I'll get into on Thursday, beyond writing an essay, how you can really take this prompt to the next level for the sake of assessment. But I also want you guys to recognize that Manifest Destiny is a huge topic in 8th grade, and nowhere in this particular inquiry does does this picture exist, which is a very famous one that used to end up on the M step every year because it was an easy question. But this also is a great way to kind of lead kids into it, even though it's not in the inquiry. You've got the symbolism of, as Lady Liberty is walking across the plains, she's driving the Native Americans out. You've got these settlers coming in, and it's dark where she hasn't walked yet, but it's also light behind her. So, this idea of the superiority of that I think, was it Terry was talking about in hers? The superiority lends itself right down to the lighting in this particular painting that has been looked at and studied before. So I'm a huge advocate for doing the staging piece, and I'm a huge advocate for asking kids the supporting question. The other thing that I do that not everyone does, that I'm a huge advocate for, especially if we're going to do inquiry in any sort of a remote setting coming up this fall, which is possible for a lot of us and already the reality for some of you, I want to make sure while I've got kids, while I'm having this conversation, I want to make sure that I actually unpack and send them off with some support for the supporting questions that go underneath that, that go underneath the compelling. So there are 3 of them for this one. And the very first supporting question is, what factors influenced westward expansion? And so I may ask students to sort of consider the economic, the geographic, and the social factors that influence westward expansion. And there's a formative performance task in every single day, or every single supporting question. And the one for this one is going to ask students to list the factors that prompted whites to move westward. And then it also goes through all of these featured sources. And these featured sources, I would also give students a preview of, especially, especially if we're connecting and trying to do this in a remote setting, because handing kids this packet doesn't give them an answer sheet, which is nice on one front, but it also, this particular packet is 25 pages long, and that's going to look a little daunting to kids. So, reassuring them that they're going to be doing this over the course of many, many days and not just one. They're not going to be required to read 25 pages worth of primary source documents all at one. And it starts off with this. It starts off with this 1836 lyrics sung by protesting workers at Lowell. Oh, isn't it a pity, such a pretty girl as I should be sent to the factory to pine away and die. Oh, I cannot be a slave. I will not be a slave. For I'm so fond of liberty that I cannot be a slave. Take a second here. You would read this as a student a little bit later into the inquiry, but take a second here. I thought we were talking about moving west. What does this have to do with westward expansion? Anyone want to wager a guess, either in the chat or by unmuting?
I think it was about having different new opportunities, especially for young people, because they were more likely to be the ones leading the movement out west. So, and it was mostly young women that worked in the Lowell Mills. Actually, I went to that museum myself, so in Lowell, Massachusetts.
I don't know who said that because I've got multiple windows up, but that is a fantastic answer.
Me, Jessica.
Other thoughts? And it's okay, because we're going to be studying this in greater detail as the days go on. I see in the chat, not falling into the trap of a 9-to-5 and seeking adventure. I love that too. I love that too. What I love about Jessica's answer is this whole idea of who is working there, and liberty could be out west. And here again, you're sort of getting into that with that seeking adventure, not falling into that trap of 9-to-5. These are all good potential first answers. You'll also be looking at some maps And what strikes you in looking at the map that's on the screen right now? Oh, not 2-page mode. Come on, Apple. What do you notice in looking at the 2 maps that are on your screen right now? Anything jump out at you? Anything that you want to make note of just in previewing them as part of the supporting question piece?
The increase in population density on the East Coast, and then the spread of more population to the West.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a great regioning activity from Dr. Phil Gershnell, where you can then superimpose population density over all sorts of interesting maps, right, Rebecca? You can do the same thing if you've done it earlier in your course. You can do the same thing with this. So it's kind of interesting what comes out of that. You'll also be looking at some population data. What strikes you as interesting about this population data?
It has really increased since 1790 to 1860.
It has. And what are some of the, beyond everyone in the colonies got busy, what are some of the other things that could speak to those growing population numbers?
Immigration.
Immigration, and immigration is going to be huge in later parts of US history, and you can start to lay those seeds of foundation in this westward expansion piece, absolutely. And then there's, an essay or two, another map that this one shows the US territorial acquisition. So it shows us when we got the Louisiana Purchase, it shows us when we got Texas. It basically gives you the map-based timeline for westward expansion and how it occurred. And it finishes off with another essay, and this graphic, which appeared, I believe, on the front cover of this, or it was on the C3 inquiry page, but this particular one that's showing people advertising for people to travel to California, and all of these things together fit in with that very first supporting question that students are going to study. What factors influenced westward expansion? So when I look at that Lowell Mill piece in particular at the beginning, a great takeaway that kids may have after they dig into all of this data is, again, what Jessica was getting to her answer. This fact of, if this is what life is like here, we can start to push out because we've got this territory, it's here, we can move out. So unpacking it that way by asking kids to understand what factors influenced westward expansion, and then going over the formative performance task for the day, which on this very first day is to list the factors that influenced westward expansion. So that sort of unpacks supporting question 1, because I don't want kids to see all of these sources and get overwhelmed and shut down and not do it. When you move into the second supporting question, this one starts to get into technology. So what new technologies influenced westward expansion? This is asking about the role of technology in encouraging and supporting westward movement. And the formative performance task on this day asks students to create an annotated illustration of some sort that depicts the influence of these new technologies. Now there are, I believe, 5 sources that they'll look at on this one. And the first 3 of them all relate to the Erie Canal. And then the other featured sources end up talking about a variety of different new technologies like the steamboat, the railroad, the telegraph, and all of those things helped improve transportation and communication to and back from the West. So when I start to unpack these sources with kids, I'm gonna scroll down, I'm giving you all whiplash, I'm sorry. So when I start to unpack these sources with kids, the very first one is this map of the Erie Canal route. Anything of notice on this? Does anything jump out at you on this first go through? You can either throw it in the chat or unmute.
If it connects to Lake Ontario, then it's going to connect into the Great Lakes. So that probably increased movement, migration to this area in particular, the Great Lakes region.
Absolutely. And we know as history teachers, the Erie Canal was super significant for many, many reasons, but the biggest was that travel piece and how you could get things, how you could move things easily and cheaply. That prior to the Erie Canal, was much, much more expensive. If I move into this also shows you some of the canals that still operate on the Erie Canal system. So yep, it's showing it basically going, yeah, it shows that pathway. You've got a connection into Lake Ontario here. You've got a connection into Lake Erie here. So this map is going to be similar to the others. I might actually give them both at once. Now here's where things are going to start to get a little interesting. As you preview this with kids, what do you notice about dirt road travel versus canal travel? What jumps out at you?
A lot less time and lower cost because, of course, time is money.
As depicted on that chart, absolutely time is money. You could take a wagon and with 8 horses, it could take you upwards, depending on where you start, of 45 days, and it'll cost $100 for a ton of your product. Or by canal travel, might take 9 days, which is a significant, even if you go at the low end of the 15, that's still a large savings. And instead of $100 a ton, you're looking at $6 a ton. As far as your budding young capitalists go, hopefully they will understand that it's a lot cheaper and a lot less time to go through, a canal if one is available.
Well, also with the increased trade, that's going to create more jobs in that area, the region that you're trading with. So that's also why migration would have headed out to that area, out to the Great Lakes area.
Yep. So you have a couple of writing pieces that are also attached in here, and then we get into this. What is this a picture of? With your students, hide the identifying characteristics. I sort of gave that away, but what is this a picture of? If we're talking
Early
new
train.
Technologies that made
A steam
early
engine.
train.
Yeah.
Kind of looks like an elephant with its trunk in the air, right? Where the steam part comes out, but yes. So this is a early engraving of a steam locomotive, and that, as you go through activities with kids, will start to showcase that too. And then you've got the good old classic steamships. These represent technology that has influenced westward expansion. And all of these are part of that second supporting question, which again, at the end of this, students will be asked to, by the time you finish this, this discussion on the Erie Canal and different types of technology, students are going to need to create some sort of illustrated, annotated illustration that depicts the influence of these new technologies on the westward expansion movement. And then when we finally get into the third supporting question, what conflicts arose from westward expansion? This is where you start to examine how the turns to the unrest that emerged between the United States and the inhabitants of Western lands, because they weren't empty as we were moving across, how that resulted in some unrest during this period. And there are only 2 sources for this part of it. And when you're done reading them, students are directed in this inquiry to make a claim supported by evidence about those conflicts that arose as whites moved westward. So you get 2 sources. The first is a timeline of both European and United States conflicts with Native Americans, which I'll scroll down and show you right now. And again, if you have this handy, I skipped a few maps on the last one. So this timeline is text heavy, it's dense, and I might even consider for some of my special education population condensing this further because it's pretty dense. I'm thinking you could even find a way to easily, quickly make it graphic. Add a little more illustration to this to help hammer home some of those points. And Probably for some of the special education students I'm thinking of that I try to channel when I think of this back from my teaching days, probably no more than a sentence for each one of these. So what's the most important part? And someone broke in and said highlight, absolutely. If you want to give them the exact same thing, highlight the sentence you want them to read that you feel like has
Or
the
underline.
best
either
portion
way.
of that. Which one?
Or you could underline
that?
it, either way. I said,
Highlight or underline, yep. And then you have this map of the Mexican-American War, which this inquiry doesn't get into. So this may require a little, you know, if you haven't taught it yet, it may require a little either fast forwarding to that to give a little more context to that, or rewinding to review if you have already covered it. So, but it's a map of the Mexican-American War, and that's the end of the sources for this particular inquiry. And there are other things that you guys are going to do during the next few days with this inquiry that kind of turn some of those things on their head. But the last thing I would do when I have kids, after I've done the staging activity and introduced the compelling question and the supporting questions, I would want them to know what that final task is going to be. And usually in an inquiry, they're kind of dry and boring. They all say the same thing. But what's great about it is, you know, it can be that paper that's so dryly presented on the page, but there's hundreds of different actual project-based activities that you can do that answer that question. And we'll talk more about those on Thursday. But the language, the boilerplate language you'll see in most inquiries from the C3 Teachers website or the Michigan Inquiry Hub is going to be construct an argument, and then it gives you that EG list, which is different on some of them. But essentially, it's always going to say, construct an argument that addresses the compelling question using specific claims and relevant evidence from historical sources while acknowledging competing views. There's also an opportunity for extension. And if you want to go into the taking informed action piece, which you might on some inquiries, you might not on others, there are opportunities there as well. I'm going to be hanging out on Thursday in all of these, but in terms of unpacking this with my students before I send them off into the world, I'm just going to unpack this. I'm going to say, you know, we're going to talk more about what types of projects you could do, and it could be a paper if you really want that traditional paper, but I'm going to give you the choice. I'm going to give you a choice. You are going to have to answer that compelling question, and you're going to have to back it up with evidence, but how you do that is completely up to you. And that's where inquiry can become this powerful practice. You're not only getting kids accustomed to hearing these big, broad, student-friendly questions, but you're also giving them an opportunity to answer that question in what in a lot of classrooms could be considered a non-traditional way. But you're still providing that really, really rich practice in here's my claim, here's the evidence that supports it, and you know, sending them off into the world like that. So I am really, really, really excited that more and more teachers up in my zone are starting to practice these more often. And I'm really, really excited to hear some of the things that they have done with this summative performance task at the end of an inquiry. But when I sat down with them to try to work on some guidance for doing inquiry remotely last year, they all said on that first day when you've got those students for 30 or 40 minutes, these are the things we need to do. And they were adamant that we should probably unpack that argumentative task as one step of the introduction of the inquiry. So they know going in all of the things that they're going to be expected to do. So I was talking with Troy this morning, and I said that the weird thing about the presentations I've been doing in the last couple of weeks is that I have put together stuff, and in my head, I'm like, gosh, this is 3 hours. I'm never going to get to all of it. And then I've ended early on each of them. And so I thought I was going to go right to 10:15 on this one, but here we are at 10:11 and 32 seconds on my questions or comments slide. So once again, the curse holds true. So I would like to just ask, I went through several things. I went through the staging activity that you might start an inquiry with. I went through asking the compelling question. I went through the steps to unpack the supporting questions. And I briefly touched on, make sure you take a moment to, talk about that summative performance task at the end. Out of all those things that I went over in the last 50 minutes, what questions might you guys still have outstanding that I can help you answer?
Hey Dave, this is Lauren Jasinski. We've started working with the C3 and doing inquiries in our class. I teach world history mostly, and so I'm needing to adjust my brain a little bit to some US stuff. But with your students, or kind of when you're imagining this, do you preview, like you just did with us, do you preview all of the sources up front, or was that like for our benefit for right now?
That is a fantastic question. It's going to depend on the inquiry. There's a fantastic one in U.S. history on the caning of Sumner, and I would actually not preview those sources outside of. I would not preview those sources outside of you know, that initial graphic of him being caned on the floor of Congress, because so much of that is about the slow burn and the mystery of that inquiry. So I have not actually taught in a classroom since the inquiry arc has come out. That's why I've relied on my teachers. They, and we specifically, when we put together some remote learning guidance for inquiry, we specifically discussed this topic, and it's going to depend on the inquiry. If it's got a slow burn and an air of mystery, don't unpack all of those sources. You know, unpack a couple, or at least mention, you know, you've got 5 these days, but they're mostly maps, you know, so that the point is not to overwhelm them. If they get a course packet that's 25 pages long of sources that they've got to read over the course of 10 days, even some of your brighter students are going to shut down. But helping them go in and see, it's actually not a lot. You're looking at these maps for this specific detail. You're looking at this image for this detail. You're going to read this, but you're reading it for this point. It is more of the point. So definitely ask the supporting questions. Use your best judgment, inquiry by inquiry, on whether or not you go through all the sources like I did. Great question.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, because I guess I was thinking like we put together one for the Crusades, and it is more like you kind of reveal more and more each day, and I feel like it would kind of defeat the purpose to preview all the sources up front. So okay, that helps. Thanks.
The ones that I've tried in the classroom, they get better at it. So it just maybe depends on how often you've practiced with them and prepped them for it. By the end of the year, if you've done enough, you can throw a giant packet at them, overwhelm them, and force them to sort through it.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
a good point,
That's the other
Christy.
disclaimer I should have brought up. The guidance that my teachers and I worked on last spring was really because we had just transitioned to online, and we were thinking, you know, what are 1 or 2 inquiries you could do? If you're practicing this year round, you know, you're going to need less and less of that introduction.
Yeah, it does depend where you are in the process too. If you're brand new to these, then you got to have some scaffolding and almost walk them through an inquiry to show them how to build the skill set of really unpacking a source and looking at that source and doing the contextualizing and sourcing and that kind of thing. So that's a part of it too. If you've already been doing it, then I agree with Dave. It depends on the nature and size of the inquiry itself, but you also have to consider where your students are in inquiry. If you've not been doing any, then this is a heavy shift, or a pretty big shift for kids to take on that responsibility of learning and grappling with the content and trying to arrive at the content instead of the content being given to them, because they're going to be practicing skills. So that's another factor to consider, is where you are as an educator in implementing the inquiry itself.
Dave, I had a question really quick. So we're kind of in different places as far as the C3 in terms of experience, and I'm just diving in and designing a unit right now for the experience. And my question about sources was, does it have to be a visual source, or could it be like a video, or I know you showed song lyrics. I'm just wondering how much flexibility we have in terms of the source material we choose. And then also, is that formative action tied 100% to that source itself? Because that's, I mean, my fear is that we lose a lot of content that way.
So the first part of that question on the types of sources, the answer is yes. Everything is a source. A video clip could be a source. A propaganda poster could be a source. You know, actual textbook pages are a source. Anything that you put in there is technically a source. The second part of your question, I'm not going to not address, but it's going to become a little bit clearer in, I can't remember if it's the one I'm doing today or the one I'm doing tomorrow. Essentially, I work through with all of my teachers the process that Kathy Swan, John Lee, and SG Grant put together in their books for building an inquiry. And if you follow those steps, by the time you get to the sources you're going to use, it's pretty apparent what sources you're going to need.
Okay.
And then if it's not covering all of the content in a content expectation, which is highly likely because some of those are pretty dense, it doesn't mean that the inquiry is bad. It just means you have more teaching to do when the inquiry is over, or possibly a follow-up inquiry on it. So stay tuned for a more in-depth answer to that. But yes, anything is a source.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Dave, Angela speaking. What book did you say that you used for that? I know they have like 3 different books out. Which one did you use?
Hold on, I'm grabbing them. I use all 3 of them. I use the very first one they came out with the least, which is this one. This one, oh, you can't see it with my background.
No, I can see it. That's the one I have. I have that one with the
Okay.
explanation.
So this one is really just background information. It's helpful in understanding some of the why, but if you want to get into the actual nuts and bolts, I don't like this one as much.
Yeah.
And it was their first trip out of the gate. These 2, this is the one that I modeled a year of training with my teachers off of.
Okay, that's the one I just purchased.
We loved it.
Okay.
Yes, this will walk you through the process a little bit more easily. And then this is the one that just came out, and it's my favorite, but my teachers up north aren't ready for it yet.
Okay, perfect.
So
I'll look
of
them
the
up.
3, this one's my favorite. Yep.
Yep. I think I just had my secretary purchase that one. I'll look for the 3rd one as well. Thank you.
Perfect. Yep.
Just to touch base on that content piece. So like I don't know what group it was in yesterday, we talked about like part of the inquiry model, you have to let go of some content. Like it's just inherent in the process. And that was like a really big challenge for me moving into the inquiry process, is just some of it you just have to be comfortable with. And then also putting the content on the back end, I found creates more curiosity for the content. And so they have a place to put it. So if you feel like things were missing, there's opportunity on the back end to kind of deliver that in a more traditional way.
Right. Well, let's thank Dave. We can give him some snaps here, or you can even put your little applause thing on the Zoom reaction there. We're going to adjust. I don't know how I just queued the little automated assistant on my shelf there. Sorry. We're going to take break just a few minutes early because I really want you to kind of just digest and think about what Dave has presented. When we come back at 10:35, I'm going to walk you quickly through a template for providing a collaborative response. You'll then move into some breakout rooms, and that is really weird. I don't know why. I don't know what I said to set off my smart speaker there. That's funny. And then we'll kind of come back and move into the rest of the agenda for the morning. So we're going to take a break here at 10:20. We'll come back together at 10:35, and I'll quickly share that collaborative response protocol with you, and then we'll move into breakouts to talk about Dave's session. So thanks again, Dave, and we'll see you back in 15 minutes. I'll try to stop that for later. I was told earlier this summer that some people, like when you're doing a one-time webinar, like they appreciate that, so they know as they hop in and they're on that they have their recording announcement and whatnot. So hopefully next time we jump into our recording session for the next time we're doing a Zoom, that won't happen, maybe even this afternoon. All right, so Dave has posted in the chat a link to all of the books, and we can grab that information, and I will put that right here underneath his item in the teaching demonstrations. We are about to shift into some small groups for about a 15-minute debrief, and today I'm going to take just a few moments to kind of explain the process of what you will do in those groups. And then you're going to have 15 minutes to talk. I borrowed this activity and adapted it from my mentor at Michigan State when I first did the Red Cedar Writing Project, Janet Swenson. She called it a collaborative response to a teaching demonstration, and that's where you get that CRTD. So I just call them CRTDs, this collaborative response. And the goal here is going to be that you and your group, when you move into the breakout room, will be talking about what you saw Dave do over the hour of his teaching demonstration and try to offer him some responses. So you'll see on the agenda, I've kind of framed all of this in the form of questions. And then in the letter, I've actually tried to frame it in the form of some prompts for you. So what will you talk about? Well, you and your group members will click into your letter and use that as a way to frame. And we're going to mix up the groups each day. So hopefully somebody's going to kind of take charge of being the timekeeper. We hope most of you are contributing to different parts of the letter over the 15 minutes. It's a very collaborative process. That's the joy of Google Docs. Hopefully all of you are typing and adding as you're hearing things. So one person says something and you're going to add it to the part about the standards. And then one person's going to say something else and you're going to add it to the part about how you felt as a learner. So that whole document is just going to kind of unfold in the 15 minutes. And the goal is that you get at least a little something in each of the 5 segments. So these guiding questions, how are you feeling about the activity as a learner and as a teacher, the elements of the activity that are really working well for you, the connections to the C3, the disciplinary literacy essentials, other digital and critical literacies and disciplinary literacies, thinking about what questions you might have, thinking about how to extend or adapt that activity into your own teaching context. These are all the things that your group will talk about. So let's imagine that I'm in group 1 and group 1 is going to open this up. I think I've set all the sharing settings appropriately so that you should be able to edit. If you're not for some reason, please drop me a note in the chat right now so I can get that fixed ASAP. But again, you and your group, you'll have a group of 4 to 5 people. You'll jump in and you'll start talking. And my hope is that one person is going to be listening and start to take some notes, and another person's going to be listening and take some notes. And again, here I've just framed all of these prompts or all of these questions again as prompts. So under this heading, you talk about how you were feeling as teachers and learners. In this heading, you talk about best practices. In this heading, you talk about connections to the C3 or disciplinary literacy essentials, and then extensions, how you might take this into your own classroom, physical or virtual. And then here you might have any questions that you would still have for Dave. And then as we're getting ready to all come back together here after about 15 minutes, you will make sure that you hit the share button, and you're going to make sure that you share with Dave, and we'll be sure to drop his his MCSSMI email address in the chat so everybody has that, and we'll be able to share it with Dave so he can go back and read your responses later. What questions might you have for me before we push you into the 5 breakout rooms and get ready to do your collaborative response? It's all making sense. All right, well, fantastic. So Mark, I think whoever is in Mark's group, oh, okay, some people dropped out of the Zoom chat and I have to reconstitute the rooms again really quickly. I'm so sorry, give me just one moment to do this. Anything else, Dave or Roy or Becky, that you would want to say as we get ready to move people into the breakout rooms?
A couple of people sent me private messages if I'll share the slides. I'll have to convert them from Keynote, but the answer is yes. So I'll get those shared by the end of the week, all of my.
Okay, fantastic. All right, and with apologies again, I'm just gonna take one moment more to get all these rooms set up. Other questions that anyone might have as you get ready? All right, thanks for bearing with me. I will get this going in 1 second. And room 5. My hope is that this will give us who we need. If for some reason you don't have at least 3 or 4 people in your room, let us know. He'll be back here in about 15 minutes. Good luck. Enjoy your conversation about Dave's teaching demonstration. Right.
Classes, but they were able to do it.
Welcome
So,
back, everybody. Welcome back.
um,
So if you would, please, we'll go ahead and kind of wrap up from your group. I know you get pulled through the Zoom time vortex and suddenly you're back in the main room. Again, if you would kindly mute when you're not speaking, we would appreciate that. And we're going to do two things in the next 10 minutes. First of all, Dave is going to save more of his compelling question stuff for tomorrow, so Becky has time to do what she needs to do. But as we transition, I wanted to do two things. For like 5 minutes, just hear one thing from each group. What is something that you're pulling out of Dave's teaching demonstration that you think is powerful and useful? And you're going to take maybe 30 seconds to say that. Just quick Twitter-sized bite from each of the breakout rooms. And then we'll take just a few minutes to reflect on this process. How did this collaborative response work for you? What did it do for you as a protocol? And how might you be able to use it? So perhaps from breakout room 1, let's see, Colin, Christine, Matt, was there one key idea that came out of your conversation that you think was particularly powerful? And we'll click into your letter to look at that so we can see what you were saying.
Well, I suppose I can jump in here. I hope I'm speaking for the group, but basically we appreciated Dave's modeling of the C3 unit all the way through from his unpacking and all that. But I think, and we really appreciate the scaffolding approach to it as well. But I think what we really appreciate also was just the questions that were provoked from it in terms of how do we take this, a unit like this, and with a compelling question from pre-test to post-test, how can we quantify individual students' understanding of it on an individual basis as opposed to a collective basis, where especially there's a real concern of for teachers who are teaching virtually, how do we make sure that it's more of a student by student quantification of their proficiency as opposed to a collective classroom understanding of it from pre-test to post-test. So,
great, thank you, Colin.
I love that. Yeah.
All right, and hopefully what you're seeing me do here too is that I am modeling another practice where if we're going to do these shared notes and we might have follow-up or questions or things, we can invite people to use the tagging feature in Google Docs to offer follow-up. All right, from breakout room 2, we had Ashley, Jessica, Lily Beth, and Terry. Would one of you like to say a quick note about what you saw in Dave's teaching demo?
I'll talk about it. Oh, oops, I'm gonna start my video. Here we go. The one thing I really liked was the extensions and adaptations. We talked about how we could adapt it for using technology for special education, ELL students, etc. And also the use of alternative assessments. I think that'll work for different types of learners and be a more creative way to assess learning than just a paper pencil task. So we like the idea that it could open up to those things.
All right, so I'm going to ask Dave, are there particular technologies you might recommend? Or come to Troy's tech sessions the rest of the week in the afternoon. All right, thanks so much.
Come to Troy's tech sessions. No, we're going to be building some of that in all week. I've got a few that I like, but I know that Becky has some. I know that Roy has some. The sky's the limit, which is both beautiful and terrifying at the same time, the number of tools out there that you could potentially use. We just want to show you that it doesn't have to be out of the box, that inquiry that you pull from the C3 Teachers site or the Michigan Hub or anything like that doesn't have to be out of the box, dry and bland. So the sky's the limit and you'll see some tools this week.
Thanks, Dave. We're now into breakout room 3. Mulunge, Jane, Lauren, and Marty. Would one of you like to say a quick word about something you saw Dave do that you thought was compelling?
We really liked that we saw that it could be differentiated for all students. We came from different grade levels and we saw that how we could use it at each grade level. And we all felt that it really fit the literacy essentials, all of them really well, just especially depending on how you expanded or assessed the unit at the end.
Great. I might even ask, are there particular DLEs that you might focus on? Oops, if I can type. Focus upon. Great. All right, fantastic. And group 4, Amber, Angela, Chris, and Kendra.
There we go. Yeah, I can talk for us. So we kind of talked a lot about, okay, thank you. If you could scroll down, thank you. Really making sure that this is a lot of information for our students, especially if we are potentially looking to be online completely, really taking the time to model and show them all these different platforms, because that can be really overwhelming for them as well. We talked a lot about, the source material to promote critical thinking and questioning, engaging them with a deeper level of content, and then also at the end allowing them to create and build tangible project-based materials so that we can assess that they've gathered the skills that we're looking for, but making sure that they have a chance to be creative and really think outside the box in that way as well.
Fantastic.
So I just want to say on that front, you're absolutely right about I saw the piece on the screen time and how much internet time they have on there. If you're using a weekly check-in to kind of launch the inquiry, I know a lot of districts did packets in the spring, and not all of it would need to be online, especially if you can send those packets of the sources home, then they're responding to them in your LMS and it's cutting out on some of that screen time. But, that's just one of many ways, but it's a great question.
Thank you. And group 5, we had Allie, Jen, Kristen, and Michelle. Would one of you like to share a little bit about your conversation about Dave's demo?
I can share.
Okay.
So we felt the 3-minute quick write was just the amount of time as a learner. It gives us time to get out our big ideas. Unpacking the compelling supporting questions gives us, as learners, small bite-sized chunks to grapple with and to think about, but knowing your students and the inquiry so you know when to push and allow for curiosity, but you also know when to scaffold and you also know when to hold back so that you're not sharing all of the sources at once to overwhelm them. Using the 3-minute write, but removing names and making it anonymous is how we would adapt it. And then love how it can be used in person and remotely. And then it was just mentioned, and I don't know where it is, but is Michigan going to create and support a C3 hub?
So the answer to that particular question is yes. I ran IDM Institute with my teachers up north, and all of those inquiries are on the My Open Book website right now. But Oakland Schools also has been running IDM with their teachers. And I've been working with Stacy and Christopher over the summer to figure out how to get all of those into one place. And it's going to be on the statewide social studies website, misocialstudies.org, along with the standards and everything else. So stay tuned. It's not going to be there tomorrow, but it's going at some point this school year. We'll have a big announcement, and then we hope every ISD is able to add to that, and teachers are able to add to those. So that website's your one stop for all social studies stuff.
Okay, amazing. I know Oakland Schools, and I partnered with them this summer to create kind of pandemic, COVID specific inquiries for K-12. So thank you.
Great. All right. Well, because I want to make sure that Becky has the time she needs and we can be flexible at the end, if we come back and we do this, I would like to hear about your thoughts about the process and the protocol of using the collaborative response. And Roy had set up a random name picker using a tool called Flippity. So we may come back to this in a little bit, but for now, we're going to pause. But keep that in mind. I'd like you to kind of ruminate and just think about what that process was like for you creating those letters. And we will definitely come back to that if we have some time. And without further ado, we are going to turn it over to Becky. So take it away.
Thank you. I'm trying to share my screen and I'm having a difficult time pulling it up. In the meantime, a couple of things that I think would benefit you if you had open. We're going to be working in just a few minutes with the Michigan standards. So you are going to want to pull that document up. We're also going to be looking at the disciplinary literacy essentials. You may want to have that open. Additionally, we're going to be working with the C3 framework. So you're probably going to want to have that open. So I'll give you a minute to get those things open and at the ready if they aren't already, and then we will start. And in the meantime, Troy, you may have to help me because I'm not able to share my screen.
Well, I just elevated you to co-host too. That should give you the appropriate permissions.
Yeah.
And let me just see if there's anything else I need to do. I think you should be able to give it a go. If not, I've got it up here on my computer too. So you wanted them to pull up the Michigan Social Studies standards, right? And we can try to link those.
Yes.
You wanted the C3 document, and then you also wanted the disciplinary literacy essentials. I know a few of those are linked from our agenda from yesterday. I'm not sure if we link directly to the Michigan Social Studies standards. Where would we find those quickly and easily on the My Social Studies website?
I am throwing links in the chat as we speak.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. All right, Becky, we can see your screen.
Great.
Now we see it in looks like in presentation mode. So I think you're ready to go.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so hopefully you have those documents open. We will get to those in just a minute. One of the things that I really want to spend a little bit of time this morning talking about is that second dimension of the C3 framework, because I sometimes think that it gets short shrift when we spend time, we build these amazing, compelling questions and supporting questions, and we get our inquiries off to a great start with dimension 1. But then I think sometimes we tend to glaze over dimension 2. So I wanted to kind of play in dimension 2 today for just a little bit this morning, and then we'll go into some more detail with that tomorrow. So we're going to today do a smackdown, if you will, with regard to social studies skills in dimension 2 of the C3 framework. So again, hopefully you have these documents pulled up, because we'll be referring to those, especially when we do some group work in just a few minutes. So one of the things that's really great about the IDMs, particularly if you go to the c3teachers.org site, you'll see a plethora of IDMs across all subject areas within social studies, and from a lot of states. And they are terrific for a number of reasons, one of which is that they provide a fantastic framework for the kind of work that we want to do with our students. However, we have to keep in mind that New York, for example, let's use New York, since this inquiry that we keep referring to this week is a New York originated IDM. What we have to keep in mind is that every state has their unique set of standards. And so although the C3 is a skills-based document, and those skills that we want students to have, remember yesterday when we started thinking about what would our ideal social studies senior be leaving school with from the social studies standpoint, the standards with regard to scope and sequence are very different. For example, in New York, they have a US history course in 7th grade that is the equivalent or pretty close to what we have in 8th grade. And so the standards, the content of those standards tends to vary a little bit. So what we have to do is we have to combine the C3 framework discipline-specific skills, Dimension 2, with our own state standards. So as you look at our 8th grade standard for regional and economic growth, you can see that it's obviously broader than the content expectation that's underneath it. If you take a look at westward expansion, take just a sec and read that content expectation, U423. And as you are looking at that content expectation, can you identify the content within that content expectation? Hopefully you're nodding because I've bolded it in red. So it's pretty easy to see the content, right? However, as you look at that content expectation, can you determine what students are supposed to do with that content? How they're supposed to think about that content? Not just each individual listing of the content, but even collectively. So what is it supposed to yield? What is meant by analysis in that particular content expectation? And we know that analyze finds its way into Bloom's taxonomy. And although we can probably put some other verbs with it, it does tend to be pretty general from the standpoint that within every course that students take, they're working with analysis to some degree. So we need to get a little more specific. And that's where the C3 framework is going to come in. So let's take a look first at the content, and let's look at it from a broader view, more of a panoramic view, if you will. As we look at the content that is listed in that content expectation, and we think about those things collectively, the results of the Louisiana Purchase, the removal of indigenous peoples from their ancestral lands, and the Mexican-American War. If we think about it from an outcome standpoint, what was the ultimate result? And I think everyone would probably agree that it was land acquisition at its base. When we think about, or when we add in that concept about growth of commercial agriculture, why was that, of all things, put into that content expectation? Again, here's how it's related to that land acquisition. The same thing with the idea of manifest destiny and that justification for that land acquisition. Now, obviously, this is an 8th grade content expectation, and you're going to drill deeper with regard to those pieces that are in that content expectation. But when you think about it from a broader standpoint, what is it that we want students to be able to really do and think deeply about? If we go back to the inquiry description, and Dave talked about this a little bit this morning, but if you take a look at that inquiry description and you can see all of the highlighted areas, these are all of the things that within this IDM, as students are engaging upon those inquiries, ultimately, these are the things that they have to do. And these are the skills that come into play, right? Everything from being able to investigate factors and conditions and conflicts, and to think about justification for the moving of the migration of white Americans and what that brought about from a cause and effect standpoint. So as you look at the inquiry description, you can see we've got a lot going on here with regard to rigor. And so again, how do we help students practice those things? And this is where we turn to the C3 framework as one way to do that. Now, the other thing that, Roy and Dave have heard me talking about this for years, probably ad nauseum, but the piece that I really think is important is for students to think big picture, and for students to really understand history, whether it's world history or US history, or Michigan studies, along the themes of history that we have used in the past in Michigan. And I know that AP courses have their own list as far as themes of history. But these themes that originated from the Michigan History Themes Project are pretty powerful and pretty effective. And so I chose the 3 that really tightly weave in and out of this IDM. When I taught, I used those themes because it really helped students recognize patterns, so that every decade, for example, or every era, there wasn't a brand new set of patterns, right? They would be able to understand that there were a lot of recurring themes, and they look a little different, but at their heart, they're reoccurring. So as we think about those things, as we keep that in mind, let's go to Dimension 2 and look where those discipline-specific skills can really help us with helping students practice with their content. So if you hopefully are familiar with the C3 framework, Dimension 2, you know that there are 4 little subsections of that dimension. The last subsection of Dimension 2 has to do with history-specific skill sets, if you will. I chose 2 that I thought were very pertinent to the work that we are asking students to do within this IDM. The first one is the very first indicator under that history section, where we want students, and here's that word analyze again, We want students to be able to analyze those connections among events and developments from a broader context, like the panoramic view that we did a few minutes ago, all the way down to some specific developments. Once we have students making those connections, then they can start to analyze those connections from the standpoint of a particular time period, as well as within a broader context. The other indicator that I selected comes from the perspective page of indicators. And again, westward expansion was quite a chunk of time, if you will, in our history. We know that there are multiple factors that influenced what went on and why it did. And so this is a really good IDM to get students familiar with and used to practicing. How do you go about determining what some of those perspectives were? Some you might think would be very obvious, others not so much. And so here's where we can practice some of our historical thinking skills with our primary and secondary source documents to really get that sense of perspective. So one of the things that we could do is we could compare maps. We could take a look at a map after the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, and we could compare it to a map drawn by John Mellish with contiguous British and Spanish possessions by 1816. We could compare the boundaries of those maps. And we could also look at his comments on the making of that map of the United States. And you can see his thoughts about westward expansion. Additional things that we could be doing to help students with those two indicators, practicing those skill sets. We could compare Jefferson's rationale for the Louisiana Purchase to Hamilton's opposition of it and the reasons why he was opposed. And it wasn't just because there was a long time rivalry between the two. There were some solid reasons for his opposition. And students actually tend to find that fascinating because it goes right to strict and liberal construction of the Constitution and the interpretation of it. We can compare Federalist and anti-Federalist viewpoints. We can compare the letters that were written between Rufus King and Alexander Hamilton. We can examine letters between Thomas Jefferson and Meriwether Lewis about the interactions with natives that are encountered on their expedition. We can compare the diary entries of both Lewis and Clark. There are some subtle differences there. We can analyze a speech that was given to a particular tribe of indigenous peoples by Meriwether Lewis in 1804. We can compare the Lewis speech to the writings of John O'Sullivan, who is credited with coining the term manifest destiny. And if you look at a couple of his writings over time, between 1839 and 1845, you'll notice some distinct differences, even within his writings themselves. This is just a start of the kinds of work and analysis that you could have your students doing that would really help practice those skill sets in historical thinking. And later this, as we go through the week, Roy and I are going to talk about how do you formatively assess some of those skills? How do you formatively assess contextualization? And if students are truly understanding what it means to contextualize. We'll talk about that, I believe, tomorrow. So there's a lot of work that can be done with that second dimension, but it's really unpacking what's in each of those little mini skill sets, if you will, with regard to those indicators. I just wanted to look at a couple of the other discipline-specific skills from Dimension 2, because some of you may not always play in history or history-specific ways of thinking. And even if you do teach 8th grade, you also understand that we really can't have history without geography. And so often it's very plausible to bring in some of the geography indicators. And we're going to talk about that tomorrow with our GSPEC activity that we're going to engage in. So here is an example of just one of the geography, economics, and civics indicators within Dimension 2. So now we're going to collaborate to get some practice with some of those indicators. What we're going to do is we're going to go into some groups in just a few minutes. But these are the tasks that you're going to want to work on in your group. I would suggest making sure that you have a timekeeper, a recorder, and at least one, if not more, depending on how many people you have end up with in your group, spokesperson or spokespersons. You're going to select which group you would like to be a part of based on the content expectation that I have selected. And there are some choices, and we're going to take a look at those choices in just a moment. So when you get into that group, you're going to want to identify what that content expectation is really all about. Then you're going to dig into Dimension 2 and select one of those indicators that you might pair with your content. And then brainstorm what that integration might look like in your classroom. So in other words, what would you have students doing in order to help practice that skill set? Where does the content expectation come into play in that? So those are going to be your tasks, and we'll keep those posted as you work in your groups, okay? And Troy, in just a moment, if you could teach folks that little trick about renaming so that they put the number of the group in front of their name, I'll have you take them through that. But if you want to be in group 1, you're going to be focusing on high school US history and geography. And this is the particular content expectation that we want you to work with, the growth of US global power. If you want to be in group 2, you're going to be dealing with high school world history and geography. And you're going to be working with content expectation 611 global revolutions. If you want to be in group 3, you're going to be focusing on 8th grade. More specifically, reform movements, the abolitionist reform movement. If you want to be in group 4, you're going to be practicing with 7th grade world history and geography. If you want to be in group 5, you're going to be focusing on high school civics. And if you want to be in group 6, you're going to be focusing on 6th grade world geography. So if you have the PowerPoint up, opened, you can go back through, you can review those groups to decide which group you'd like to work in. Again, the content expectation is right there. It's been selected for you. Your task is to really dig into Dimension 2 to try to come up with the best indicator that's going to play nicely with that particular content. So as you think about, for a moment, what group you'd like to be in, Troy is going to help show us how to make getting into those breakout rooms a little quicker and easier. Troy, do you want to talk about that little trick to do that?
I certainly can. So what you need to do, I'm going to take over screen sharing really fast. You should note on your, if you click on the bottom in Zoom and click participants, and then you'll see that list of names up there. You should note that you have a more button. And when you click on the more button, one option will be to rename yourself. So for instance, I'm going to rename myself right now, and I'm going to say I want to be part of group 1. So I'm just going to put a number 1 in front of my name. And now everybody should be seeing on screen that I have a 1 in front of my name. Becky's letting me know that Zoom magic worked the way it would. So again, if you need to, I'm just going to share screen one more time to show that little trick. You're going to open up that participant button at the bottom of the Zoom window. And again, click the more button and you should have an option to rename. So we'll give everybody a moment to do that. And then we'll quickly get the rooms reconstituted. This is just another one of those tips for being able to quickly figure it out. We could have had you put your names in a Google Doc and list your names there, but we're trying something a little bit different today. And if you're having trouble with that, please let me know and I will try to make those adjustments for you. Becky, what else would people need to know as they get ready to go into the breakout rooms?
That's it. Apparently the permissions have to be changed. So Troy, you and I can work on that so that people can view the PowerPoint.
That's easy. I can adjust that really fast. Sorry about that. Yeah, I can fix that. Not a problem. What else do we need to know here before we get ready to go? All right, so I'm adjusting the settings on the PowerPoint. Let me see. Actually, I think, is this anyone in the group? Oh, it's made by the Michigan Council of Social Studies. So somehow I got invited without that social studies domain name. Other people may not. I could either make a copy or you could make it publicly available, Becky, whatever works best.
Oh, I'm trying to think what's going to be easier. Let's see.
Oh, okay. All right. So Angela wants group 2. Yeah, and if anybody's having any trouble changing your Zoom settings, just let me know in the chat and I can get you to the right group. All right, so I'm going to start constituting the groups. We'll get the PowerPoint settings figured out. Again, there's going to be a total. If you've put put it in the chat. I will try to find it, but you might just be hanging out with me here in the main room for a moment until I can figure out who exactly is going where. So what's nice about this is what it does is I can see everybody's name and what room they want to go to. And then I just go, oh, okay, anybody who has a number 1, I'm going to assign them to room 1. Anyone who has a 2, I can quickly assign them to room 2. Anyone who's room 3. So it makes that whole process of assigning the room names pretty easy. And again, if you are left hanging without a breakout room here in just a moment, I will try to find where you need to be. All right. Anything else that we need to know before we get people ready to go to the breakout rooms? All right. And how long, Becky, do you want them to be there? About 10 minutes, 15 minutes?
Yeah, I think 10 minutes would be great.
Okay, we'll do a check-in at 10 minutes and then we'll see where we're at. So you'll be whisked away. If you're not, that means that I will get you there momentarily. So have fun in your breakout rooms. All right, so Becky, you have a few moments here to kind of wrap us up and help us think through this activity. I'll be really brief and actually say my quick note about the announcement for the technology workshop this afternoon. And that way you can have all the time that you need here. We are going to look at a couple tools from the Knight Lab School of Journalism out of Northwestern University. And we are going to specifically be looking at 2 tools for digital storytelling. One is the Story Map tool, and one is the Timeline tool, which allows you and your students to embed images and videos and other forms of media into interactive overlays on Google Maps, as well as interactive timelines using Google Sheets. So if you're interested in either of those tools and thinking again about that idea of having them express their inquiry and create that argument, both in writing, but also through other multimedia, those are the tools we'll explore this afternoon. So again, as you come back from the breakout rooms, we welcome you to please mute if you're not talking. And Becky, take it away. What do you want us to be thinking about as we're coming back from our skills smackdown?
Thanks. We didn't have anyone going into group 1. Group 2 was very large and in charge. They really grappled with which one of the indicators was really important and could be sometimes difficult for students to really grasp. So I'm going to turn it over to Lauren, I believe, and Christy is going to be back up, and they're going to kind of share what their content expectation was all about, and then which indicator they paired it with.
Hi everyone. So our content expectation for world history was referencing the global revolutions. Specifically in world history, focus on the French Revolution and Latin American revolutions. And then we chose to kind of zero in on the C3 standard, explain how the perspectives of people in the present shape interpretations of the past. A couple of the observations that we had about that centered mainly on like the conversation about who writes history. You know, all sorts of nice like Hamilton throwbacks to that too. But it's important to know like where the accounts of revolutions are coming from, that it can shape whether or not students feel like revolutions were successful or not based on who it is they're reading, right? If it was the revolutionaries or the people that were overthrown. We can also compare it a lot to like modern day revolutions that are happening around us. I think that kind of this idea of like a rebellion speaks to teenagers a lot right now. And so that provides kind of a good context to talk a little bit about why might people be frustrated, why might people revolt in the first place. And I think that can shape a lot about how we understand these historical revolutions. We can also talk a little bit about the historical context that they were written in. Marty mentioned like the difference in literacy rates greatly impacts who we have history from. And just reminding our students that just because it's a primary source, it doesn't necessarily mean it was the full story. And we also talked about just the frustration that historians and students have with the fact that history does change, right? Our content isn't set in stone, that we develop new things. The great example that was given was it doesn't relate to revolutions, but the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, right, changes our understanding of Bible stories. And so helping our students understand that, like, yeah, we can teach a narrative, but that might evolve based on new things that we find out, or new stories that we hear, or new primary sources that we uncover. Christy, anything else that you want to add to that? Uh-oh, Christy, you're muted.
No, I think that sums it up. We just did some troubleshooting, trying to get students to understand, point of view. So I thought you did great.
Wonderful. How about group 3? You want to share what you worked on?
So Malonge and I'll start Malonge and let you fill in. We worked on the reform movements. And so our standard spoke to the idea of describing the formation and development of the abolitionist movement. And in doing so, it wanted us to look at key leaders, so key abolitionist leaders. And then it also wanted to look at the response of Southerners and the response of Northerners to the abolitionist movement overall. So the indicator that we pulled, I'll put in the chat, I think I got it, was there about this idea of multiple factors that influence perspectives of people during the different historical eras. And it got to speak in a little bit to what I know I've seen in working with Malonge and Grand Rapids Public around through DBQs, like kind of a debate setup. So we'd kind of envision possibly even having students take on the role of maybe some of the leaders and sharing some of the thinking of the leaders, and then have the rest of the students be in those groups representing Southerners and the other group possibly representing Northerners, and just having them share their thinking about what these leaders might state. Started to get really excited and get into like the back and forth of it, but going back and looking at the standard, it's more about describing the formation and development of it, and then what did the leaders say versus what was the response of the Southern folks and the response of Northerners.
Excellent. Nice work. Group 4.
We had the 7th grade ancient history standard, which was describing the role of things like state authority, military, taxation, and things like slavery to build and maintain empires. We chose the economics dimension, the first one, explaining how economic decisions affect the well-being of individuals, businesses, and societies. And we like the idea of comparing different civilizations and looking at how they built their empires. Some definitely had more military prowess than others, and how that impacted the civilization and the people in the civilization, whether they were forced to be in the military or it was voluntary. Slavery, how that looked in different ancient civilizations. So ours was really a comparing of things.
Excellent. And I love how you went outside of, even though you were working on something that might specifically, like at first glance, you might have thought, well, let's look at this from a historical perspective. But you did such a nice job of bringing in another one of the disciplines and that way of thinking like an economist, to really show students how they're all integrated, really, when it comes down to it. So nice job, group 4. Group 5.
I can go. So our group was looking at one of the civic standards, specifically talking about how people can agree on constitutional principles in the abstract, yet they disagree when they're applied to specific situations. So the C3 that we pulled out was applying civic virtues and democratic principles when working with others. And we felt like this would be one where, there's literally a limitless number of things we could use right now with students. We could
think we might have had Matt freeze there.
Yep.
Practice our good wait time. Oh, there he's back. All right. It's like that 8 to 10 second of, oh, is he frozen? Is he not? Anybody else from Matt's group want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. But yeah, basically, so this idea of you know, 2020 is ripe with all sorts of you know, current events, issues where you have, you know, liberty versus order, and so when you apply those when working with others, just taking whether it's the mask mandates or the lockdown orders, or you know, just taking the motorcycle rally in Sturgis over the weekend, and so just, you know, having these discussions or debates, you know, in class about, you know, what do these terms mean, these abstract terms of liberty and common good, and, you know, these core democratic values, and then just like applying them in certain specific situations in order to understand what the appropriate, you know, expression and application of these terms mean in these situations. So that's what we talked about.
And as well, Matt also talked about how we can bring in history aspect from this. So we can show things, and then we can bring in history, because honestly, I teach civics, I've taught all subjects, and civics is a reiteration of world history, economics, and US history. And so it ties them all nicely together. And so we can definitely overlap that for the students to see that what they learned does continue on in any type of subject, social studies wise, you know, so.
Especially from a contextualization standpoint, right? Why is separate but equal, you know, why does it go really one way during one decade, and then a few decades later is completely reversed? Did we get Matt back?
Got Matt back. His group covered for him in the Zoom freeze, so I think we're okay.
Let's go into group 6.
Yeah.
All right. In group 6, we were looking at 6th grade, and we were looking at our content standard of the human characteristics of place. And we were looking at how cultural experience influences people's perspective of place and regions. Looking under that theme of how cultures change in reaction to like major historical developments. But then we really started to just talk about the different things that we as 6th grade teachers were using. And we were interested in like the inquiry process. And one of the people has been working on making a toolkit that has inquiry questions that cover things like cultural diffusion and looking at the influence of pandemics. And one of the people was talking about the Giants program and looking at culture as it's influenced by geography, and then cultural shock and adaptation in a unit that studies, again, a reference back to like the Western expansion and how things were different than what people imagined it would be based on their prior knowledge and cultural perspective. And then another person of our group was talking about National Geographic and a project, an Out of an Eden walk that looks at different aspects of cultural perspective and change, and a person's journey that's looking at technological innovation and migration and cultural survival, even climate change over time. So we started out with that question, and then we kind of got lost on conversations of some of the great things that people are doing with it.
Sounds like it. Sounds like you had a pretty intense conversation. That's great. So I know it's 12:15 and we've got to go so that folks have time for lunch before coming back for the tech workshop, which we want to all do, I'm sure. But what I would ask is that you keep this work that you just finished, keep this in mind, because tomorrow we're going to play a little bit more in Dimension 2 with some more of those specifics that you were kind of drilling down toward. We will kind of pick up where we left off with that tomorrow morning. So thanks everyone for your work today. And Troy, did you have anything else that you need to say before we sign off?
What time are we starting the tech workshop?
At about 1 o'clock. So actually, if you're willing to just jump out of the Zoom room, just go ahead and close. That way I can process the recording from this morning, and it'll be the same exact URL right at 1 o'clock. We'll talk about story maps and timeline from the night lab. And we can hang out after the recording for just a few moments. Remember to change your Zoom name so you're not still mysteriously number 5 or number 2 in your next meeting. And yeah, we'll hang out for a few minutes, and we appreciate your time being here today. And if we don't see you in the workshop, have a great afternoon.